Hey guys, it's Mike here, and in this video I'm going to be doing my spoiler review and discussion for Solo: A Star Wars Story. Now, I did a spoiler-free review, which I recommend checking out before seeing this, so you can get a better idea of how I feel about the movie. And if you're interested in seeing this movie, of course, I would say to check it out first before seeing these spoilers. However, that's entirely up to you. So without further ado, I'm going to get into some of these spoilers. Now, there's a number of things I wanted to talk about in depth after leaving the Solo movie, especially one big moment that happens towards the end of the film, which I'll be talking about in a little bit. However, I'm first going to start off by talking about one scene that I think is going to be maybe very polarizing among the fan base, and that is how Han Solo actually gets his Solo name. Now, Han was not born with the Solo last name in this movie, in this continuity that we're seeing. He was basically just known as Han to our knowledge. However, after Emilia Clarke's character is taken captive by the Empire, when they're trying to escape from Corellia, Han enlists in the Galactic Empire's army so that he can become a pilot. However, at this point, the recruiter is asking him, "Oh, what's your name? Han what?" And then Han is like, "Oh, well, I have no people, I'm alone." So I guess the recruiter gets a little bit creative and was like, "Oh, so you're Solo, Han Solo," and he makes that his name, and his official name when he signs up to be a member of the Galactic Empire's forces, which I'm not entirely sure I like. I kind of just like the idea of it being his last name, or maybe something he came up with on his own. Having the recruiter do it seems like a little bit cliche. It seems almost kind of like something out of a superhero movie, like for the longest time in superhero movies, they were just afraid of saying like somebody's real name, or like the name of their character, so they would always have like an offhanded comment like, "Oh, the Superman is coming," and then somebody would be like, "Superman? Who's that?" And they're like, "Oh, that's just what they're calling him," The whole thing kind of reminds me of The Dark Knight Rises, when we find out that Joseph Gordon-Levitt's last name is Robin, which is obviously a reference to Robin from the comics, but I don't know, I just don't know if I really liked how it went, but I guess it could have been worse. And I can totally see a lot of people not liking this for pretty valid reasons. And after this is a part of the movie I really do like, and I think that it would have been great if they expanded more upon it, or, had just had the entire movie take place during this point, and that was when Han is actually, like, in the infantry for the Empire, and we see them, like, taking over a planet, and all around him is just, like, a horrible war where everyone is being killed. Even his commanding officer is like, "Oh, you gotta fight for the Empire," and he rushes into battle and is immediately killed by, like, a mortar or something like that, I really like that part. One of the biggest problems for me with Star Wars is the fact that we don't get to see enough of the Empire and behind the scenes of the Empire, and how the people fighting for the Empire feel, how the commanding officers feel. There is one cool scene in this movie before Han enlists where we see in the recruiter's office galactic propaganda, which is saying, join the Galactic Empire, join the armies so that you can make a difference, so that you could become like a big shot or whatever it is, which is very similar, of course, to how people are recruited into the military in real life. And I really like that they had that in this movie, which also kind of reminds me, I guess, of Star Wars Rebels with Empire Day. However, I just feel like they didn't stay on that long enough, and pretty much, after one scene, which is 3 years in the future, there's a time skip in which we see Han, fighting on the battlefield. He pretty much already is deserting and joins with Beckett's group, who are not even soldiers, they're just pretending to be soldiers so that they can steal things that are on that planet. So I feel like the movie definitely could have been better if they had kind of stayed there a little bit more, and maybe we could have actually gotten a war movie for a Star Wars movie, which I know seems like a kind of novel idea, but I think that would have been really cool. Now, another thing for me that I feel like is kind of an issue, and maybe a lot of other people won't react the same way to me, but I feel like the whole interaction between Lando and L3, and kind of like Lando's reaction to her death, is kind of ridiculous, First off, I don't really know if I like the idea of them having this droid basically be a walking, talking political movement, like, "Oh, we gotta free everyone, equal rights." It's like every single word is just obnoxious and ham-fisted and in your face about the political messages that they're trying to tell through this character. And I can only imagine that all of this came from Kathleen Kennedy herself. But then they have her say that she thinks Lando is like attracted to her, and then they imply that Lando and her could actually have sex, which is like, what? what? How is that even possible? And why is this in a Star Wars movie? Especially considering like so many of the other movies in Star Wars are like pretty much just devoid of sexuality, whereas this is just going over the top with it. And then when she finally dies, like, just keep in mind, this is a droid, this is a robot, this is somebody that, like, for most people in Star Wars in the past has just been shown to be a tool. But then Lando rushes over to her and is like screaming, and then he's like crying over her death. And it just seems really out of place in a Star Wars movie, because let's look at the original trilogy. Look at how they treated the droids in those movies, you know? Chewbacca cared about C-3PO, and like the non-human characters cared a little bit, but like normally Han Solo didn't care about the droids. Like C-3PO was talking in one scene and Lando just like walked away without even acknowledging him. When C-3PO gets blown up on the Cloud City, people aren't screaming and being like, no, C-3PO! The only person who comes close is Chewbacca, which again is an alien from a naturalistic society who doesn't even speak English, or basic as you would say in Star Wars. So I just feel like it's really out of place, and they're really trying to do what the prequels did, you know, especially Phantom Menace, where you had that stupid scene of Padme, the queen of a freaking planet, saying thank you to a droid, R2-D2, which is like, why thank a droid who's programmed to do this stuff and is literally just like a walking, talking piece of metal, you know? Like, there's a real disconnect between how they treat the droids in the original trilogy and how they're making it seem like people would cry and scream over them. And if they're really trying to imply that Lando had a relationship with this droid, then that kind of just makes it even more dumb. Now, another big thing that happens is that Beckett eventually turns on Han, which I guess you can kind of see coming throughout the movie. You know, he's constantly telling Han, don't trust anyone, which, you know, usually in a movie like this, you know that he's saying, don't even trust me either, trust literally no one. And then when he comes through the door towards the end and betrays Han to Paul Bettany's character, we see that, you know, he is the one turning on Han. And I guess this is supposed to teach Han that lesson that he has in episode 4, you know, oh, I don't really trust anyone, I trust in myself, I trust in this blaster by my side, you know? So it's supposed to be setting that apart, and especially like their duel at the end of the movie, in which we see that like Beckett is like reaching for his gun, and he's like telling Han, you know, I'm gonna teach you another lesson, and before he can even pull the gun, Han just shoots him right through the chest, you know? Which is of course trying to show again that Han is not somebody who is afraid to shoot first, like in the original movie, how he killed Greedo by shooting him first, which George Lucas and other people have constantly tried to mess with to make it seem like didn't happen, which obviously it did. But the fact of the matter is that they're really trying to hammer that home, and I guess I do like it in some ways. It feels like something kind of out of Indiana Jones, you know, where the guy's like swinging his sword around trying to challenge Indy to a fight, and Indy is just like screw it and shoots him like immediately and just walks away, you know? So I think it's within Han Solo's character to do that, although it kind of comes pretty quickly considering what happens throughout the rest of the movie, and we don't really see him do this before that as far as I can think of. But I don't think it was too bad, and I think that the ending of this movie in many ways really did help it out. It left on a note that was much better than how it started, for example, which the first like 20 minutes or so of this movie I just really didn't like at all. But speaking of the ending, I really have to get into this next part, which is really the biggest part of the movie I wanted to talk about, and that is Darth Maul's cameo at the end of the movie, which I had zero idea that Darth Maul was going to be in this movie, and that is one of the legitimate surprises of the film for me. Like, I thought if they were going to do like secret cameos, maybe we'd get like Obi-Wan in the background somewhere, or maybe we'd even get like Maz Kanata and we'd learn how like Han and Chewie met her for the first time. You know, she's an old alien who knew Yoda and has run that establishment for a long time. And I thought maybe we'd even get to see Canto Bight, which we also didn't get to see, so it makes me wonder why they built it up so much and then we don't even get to see the planet, at least in this movie. But then basically at the end, Emilia Clarke takes the ring off of Paul Bettany's character and like places it into this machine, and a hologram appears, and then we hear this voice that I immediately recognize. I'm like, wait a second, how do I know this voice? Is that who I think it is? Because of course it's the same voice as in the Clone Wars and Star Wars Rebels. And then we see this guy in a hood, and I'm like, either they're playing us and this is like young young Snoke, or this is going to be Darth Maul. And we see his metal legs. I'm like, oh shit, it's really going to be him. And he takes this hood off that he's wearing, and it's Darth Maul. And he's like, I want you to come to Dathomir so that we can continue to work together very closely. And I was just like, okay, this is definitely a really good thing that this movie did, because one of the biggest problems for me with Darth Maul's return in Clone Wars and Rebels is it was never really like actually referenced in the live action movies, you know? Like, it was really cool seeing, you know, him taking over Mandalore and then seeing his story with Ezra in Rebels, but ultimately I feel like it was kind of wasted, and he as a character was wasted because he never showed up in live action form. And we know that Ray Park is still in, I guess, the good enough shape to play him. He could definitely portray this character as an awesome badass character that he really never got to be in the movies, and he got to be a lot more of in the animated series. So that's definitely something I thought was great, because now that really opens up a lot of possibilities of what they could do with Maul during this period of time. Of course, we know the beginning of Maul's story, we know the end of Maul's story thanks to these series, but this takes place in a period of time between the two, when Maul, I guess, is still around his most powerful. So it definitely seems like there's a lot more to explore there, and they very heavily hinted at doing more in the future. I don't know if I really want to see it happen in a Solo movie. I don't want a Solo sequel, to be honest, because of how just boring this movie was and how just unenjoyable it was for the most part for me. But if they do like a Maul standalone movie, or they have Maul be the villain of the Obi-Wan film, which I've discussed in previous videos, then I think that that would be a really great use, and that would probably be the best thing coming out of this movie, which is why I said in my review that a cameo was probably the best part of this film, and the part that makes me the most excited, because even though Darth Maul in the movies is a very underdeveloped character who is just there to be cool and have a cool lightsaber battle, and then is just cut in half unceremoniously and sent away in the first movie, he's somebody that there's still a lot of room to explore with and really show off just how cool of a character he is in the movies. So I really hope they do that, and if they do, then that's certainly something I'm looking forward to. It's interesting that I'm looking forward to a potential spin-off about Darth Maul, a character from The Phantom Menace, than I am looking forward to Episode 9, which is a sequel to the original trilogies. But I guess that's another story for another time. So overall, there's a lot of things that happen throughout this movie that, of course, I was not the biggest fan of, some things which I didn't talk about here, and some things which will likely stand out even more to me when I rewatch the movie in the future. You know, I've rewatched all of them, including the prequels, multiple times, so I'm sure I'll rewatch this one and get a better understanding of the things I do and don't like. You know, maybe I'll even like this movie more when I rewatch in the future, but that waits to be seen. But anyway, guys, what are your favorite and least favorite parts of the Solo movie? And also, where would you rank the Solo movie compared to the others? Let me know in the comments down below. And if you like this video and want to see more, then make sure to stick around, because there's a lot more to come in the future. Make sure to subscribe to this channel and enable notifications so you could see all of my content right away when it comes out.
Yeah, and you better subscribe, enable those damn notifications.